All right, guys, so let's talk about elites, okay? We talked about the pluralist theory of democracy. We also talked about the traditional theory of democracy, particularly dealing with direct democracy and participatory democracy. Pluralist theory, that's where we are actually talking about how there's these interest groups that vie for power. We also talked about a subset of that called hyperpluralism, where there's so many interest groups that literally nothing gets done, okay? And sometimes... Now remember, these are theories. This is not somebody saying, this is the way the government is. These are theories of democracy. So you can literally sort of apply these all the time. And it just depends what you believe about our government, whether you think it's elitist or whatever. So the elite, basically the idea is that we have these elected representatives. They serve as trustees for the voters. Now, we actually call it the trustee model of representation. Basically, we pick the people that we trust to make decisions for us. Okay? That's what trustees means. We trust them to make decisions for us. Okay? Now, the elite theory emphasizes limited participation. Essentially, they want us to vote. Good. Okay. Also, the power is concentrated with very few, and they are often the wealthy. They don't have to be, though. Okay. A political elite, by definition, is just someone who exerts extra power in the government, or they have more influence than others do. Okay. Ooh, sorry. Thought I had another bullet there.
Completely off topic, but there was a president that got ran up on and shot, right?
Say again?
He got ran up on, literally he was surrounded by guards, but one dude just walked up on him and pop out.
Oh, was that McKinley?
McKinley was shaking people's hands, yes, surrounded by guards, and a guy had his hand was all bandaged up. He had a pistol in the bandage. Got it.
He had a pistol in the bandage?
Yeah, he was an anarchist. All right, so think about these theories. The elite theory is the last theory of democracy that we're going to talk about here. Which one characterizes our government in your opinion? Now remember, you could argue for any of these. You could argue for traditional, you could argue for pluralist, you could argue for elite.
You could argue for a mix of them, couldn't you? I mean, there's elements of all.
Yeah.
I would say there's elements. I wouldn't say. I'd say the most cynical of all of them is the hyper-pluralist, because they say, yeah, we just can't get anything done. Elites, that's the second one. And a lot of people argue against sort of the elite theory. They say because, they may think our government is that way because you have these sort of powerful, and they tend to be the wealthy people that are our leaders. But is that always the case? What is a political elite? Y'all have heard of influencers, right? Particularly now we have, the
Corvette.
Okay, we got all those YouTubers and all. Are they uber wealthy?
I guess not.
Eventually they might be. I don't know. They could be okay, but their power is not so much in their ability to write a check, is it? What are they actually doing?
Mukbangs.
Okay, but they're influencing people's choices and all that kind of stuff, right? So I think I wouldn't call them political elites, but I would call them elites. Some of y'all probably are subscribed to their and watch their newest video or whatever, right? That's just kind of how it works. Well, politics is kind of the same way. And, there was a time when I was a lot more involved in state politics, to the point that I used to go lobby the state legislature. I knew our elected legislators fairly well. I'm still a member of the professional organization, the teachers organization here for DeSoto County, but for 8 years I was the president of that organization. So I went and met with those people, and whenever election time came around, it's funny, I'd get emails from them, or they'd call me up because they thought that I could deliver something for them. What did they think I could deliver for them? Votes. Okay. Votes, because being that I was an elected official, my tone towards things could sway votes a direction or not, right? Okay, it's still today, just because so many people know that I teach government and that kind of thing, and I am a huge dork when it comes to government, especially at election time. I'm always looking up who's funding which candidate, that kind of thing. People do. They say, hey, who should I vote for? What do you think my answer is?
I don't know, bro.
Hey, do some research and figure it out. That kind of thing. Because, hey, don't ever be somebody who can be led along. Now, if somebody asks a pointed question, hey, do you know what this candidate says about this? Or where this candidate stands on this? And it's like, okay, maybe I do. And if I don't, it's like, no, but you know what? Let's see if we can't find out. You have to, the cool thing, at least with state offices, you can generally go up to these people and say, hey, what you think? And sometimes they may, this is what I think, or they'll say, that's an interesting question. Man, the sky sure is blue today. Okay? I mean, they'll throw a smoke screen quick. Particularly, because they don't want to get cornered on an issue, which that's how it works sometimes. But I want you to understand that an elite, was I a congressman or something? No. But in those people's eyes, I was an elite because I could deliver something. Actually, some of the most powerful elites in some of these states, they're not those super, super wealthy people. They're just maybe those really involved people who understand and know what's going on.
Mr. Gardner running the city.
No, never.
Mr. Gardner's a mob boss.
As far as
No. All right. Any questions about the elite theory?
In a suit.
So, but do think about that. Which one do you think? See, I see it as a mix from time to time. Sometimes it's clearly elitist. Other times, yeah, plural. I like pluralism the most because I think this is just Gardner saying this, but I think the best legislation comes when different ideas are batted back and forth, compromises are made, both sides win a little bit, But then I also think for a while we swing into hyperpluralism and people start chasing their rabbits and they got blinders onto everything else, which I don't know. We'll see. Okay, so basically we'll move on from that. Don't worry about that. We'll do that later. Sorry, I forgot to change the order of this. I did this a little differently. Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. I don't really like this one. Yeah. Articles of Confederation. There we go. Sorry, I accidentally opened an older PowerPoint that did things in a little different order, and that's on my bad. So let's talk about the Articles of Confederation. Articles of Confederation. This was our first form of government. The Second Continental Congress drafted this. It becomes the actual government of the colonies in 1778. It is a very weak form of government. Now, why do you think the Second Continental Congress would draft a weak form of government?
They ain't know what else to do.
Because I'm only. They didn't.
Okay, they're trying to get out from under what they call a tyrannical government, right?
Yeah, they didn't want to be like Britain.
This was the most anti-British government that could be. The Articles of Confederation, you had 13 essentially independent states, and so this was, what they came up with. There's no power to tax the people directly. That was the big beef with the British, wasn't it? We got these taxes, we got no representation. So we're going to make a government that can't tax anybody. What's the purpose of taxes?
So, fund the government and
To
the nation.
be able to make the government able to provide services to the people, right?
Yeah.
There's no taxes. Problem. That's a problem from the beginning, right? Okay. Also, they had no power to regulate commerce. Remember, those states were essentially independent. So those states, they started putting tariffs on each other and stuff like that. So this was, not the best kind of deal. Okay? Also, there was no power to create and maintain an army. It did say that they could raise an army, but they had no way to maintain it. That goes back to the first one there. So just these things show that this is a pretty limited government, right? The power rested with the states, okay? And this ends up being a serious problem. Now, this government's going to go 1778. This government is actually in place until 1789 when it is replaced when the Constitution is ratified, okay? This was a very, very weak form of government. Is everybody good here? No president. There's no, in fact, not just no president, there's no executive branch. There's no judicial branch.
Is this one of those foundational documents that we did not?
Yeah, the Articles of Confederation is. I just haven't printed it off for you.
You said no president, no judicial branch?
Yeah, there's no executive branch,
And no executive.
no judicial branch. You have a legislative branch. A legislative branch that have their feet tied together, one arm tied behind their back, pretty much.
Why do I feel like I've never heard about that? As far as the Articles of Confederation.
You studied it in 8th grade, and it just depends how much your teacher went into it. A lot of times in 8th grade, you focus more on the Revolutionary War, the Declaration of Independence, and then you jump right to the Constitutional Convention, where you merely mention that we replaced the Articles of Confederation. But I want you to understand this was a process. I mean, we were breaking ground by declaring independence and gaining independence, right? And I want you to think of, and you got to kind of think of government as you know what a pendulum is?
Yeah.
Like on a clock, swings back and forth. Maybe you read The Pit and the Pendulum by Edgar Allan Poe. Okay. But think of the pendulum swinging. Okay, so say maybe we had really strong government here under Britain. Well, people didn't like that, right? So now we're swinging to the opposite side, where there's no government, essentially, no national government to speak of. They could approve treaties and stuff like that. It was very, very limited powers, okay? But when we realize this doesn't work, what happens? Swings back. And that's truly why throughout our history, we sort of have a swinging back from conservative to liberal to try and find that medium. But we're always moving, so we can't just stop in the middle.
Why didn't somebody just off us?
Huh? During this time?
Yes.
Britain was broke.
Uh-huh. France
had a French Revolution about to start, so they had a serious issue. Spain, because of our American Revolution, the Spanish colonies, by 1820, New Spain's going to collapse. So all those big empires were shook to the core by us getting our independence, because that sort of sparked independence movements throughout the New World. So nobody was in a place right then. The British people would not bear any more war with the colonies. The British could have won that war, but public opinion turned against it, and truly what happened was Parliament flipped to the other party. And that party said, okay, we're going to draw out. We're going to pull it out.
That sounds familiar.
It truly is. Our system is based on the British system, roughly, okay? Public opinion plays in. The same thing happened in Vietnam with us. Truly, you could say the American Revolution was the British people's Vietnam. It was a long war that was a civil war. That was a civil war for Britain, right? How long are British subjects going to say, yeah, let's keep killing British subjects? It turned against them. So that's why I remember you have remember that the Loyalists were called the Tories. Tories, that was the party in power at that point. Okay? And the Tories, they lose power after the Battle of Yorktown. That's what changed everything. So, Articles of Confederation, back to that, super weak. Oh, yeah, there's no power. Okay, so, but we limp along with this. There's two major pieces of legislation that now, to get a law passed, just a law, you have to have 3/4 of the states agree to that law. Okay, there's only 13, so you have to have at least 9 agree. There's two major laws that end up being passed. They deal with western lands. You got the Land Ordinance of 1785 and the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Those are the only two major pieces of legislation that come out of the Articles of Confederation. We actually carry those on. We copy those throughout our gaining territory after that. Other than that, not much is done. The states are in competition with each other for trade, and they're putting tariffs on each other, and it is just, they're not working good. It's not working well. They're making their own treaties for trade with other nations. Some states are completely out of debt. Others are in heavy debt because of the American Revolution, particularly Massachusetts. Massachusetts, if you think back to the American Revolution, all of the early events in the American Revolution happened in Boston, didn't they? You know, we've got the Boston Massacre, we got the Boston Tea Party, we got the Intolerable Acts. That was on Boston. And so the colony, then state of Massachusetts, incurred a ton of debt building up defenses against the British Army, which essentially for the first part of the war was centered in Boston. Also, Massachusetts was almost completely dependent on the British Empire for trade. What did they export from Massachusetts? Do you remember?
Irish Spring, I don't know. Tea?
No. They imported that, and then they threw it in the harbor. Okay? They had contracts with the British Navy to provide naval stores, masts for ships. They did shipbuilding. They actually built British ships in Boston. Well, what if hey, we're at war with Britain. Is Britain going to trade with us after this war?
Probably not.
No. But let's talk about Virginia. What was Virginia's main export? No.
Indigo?
Tobacco, some indigo, and rice, those kinds of things. Virginia, not so much rice, but think South Carolina. They had a huge rice export. Okay? Is another country going to buy that stuff from us? Yes. Yes. They'll buy that stuff. So the southern states, their economies are not as affected by the American Revolution. They're able to pay off their debts very quickly. In fact, Virginia was the first state to pay off its debt. Also, those southern states had less debt than like Massachusetts did. So they come out of this, southern states are looking good, woo! And the New England states are struggling because they don't have markets for their goods anymore. So they've got to pay their debt back because they're in debt to nations like France. And they don't want France to come and collect that debt. They don't want France to come in and say, well, this is a nice city. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
So the thing is, those states have to pay that debt back. So what they start doing is raising taxes in those states. Wait, taxes are a problem, aren't they? That's one thing I want you to understand. Taxes did exist in the colonies, and the colonists had very little problem with the taxes that were colonial taxes that their elected representatives had come up with. Okay? But after the Revolution under the Articles of Confederation, states like Massachusetts, they start raising property taxes because that is the one vehicle they have to pay their debt back. Okay? And that leads to Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion is a rebellion of farmers in Massachusetts. Crazy old Massachusetts. Basically, they're these poor farmers. They owned a piece of land that they were essentially subsistence farmers, and the state was demanding property taxes from them. Okay? Some of them had been Revolutionary War veterans. They didn't get paid for fighting in the American Revolution because, well,
What?
how are we going to pay them?
Somebody getting robbed.
We got no money.
Excuse me, teachers. If you have any 11th graders with the last name W through Z, WXYZ, if you have 11th graders with the last name W, X, Y, or Z, please send them to the cafeteria with a pen and a pencil to the cafeteria at this moment. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So, but think about this. They were subsistence. That means they're not really practicing cash crop agriculture, are they? There might be some bartering. It might be that maybe Will's farm, they've got a lot of chickens, right? So he trades eggs to Jody for a cow, or there'd be a lot of eggs for a cow. I don't know. Or milk. You trade eggs for milk or whatever, okay? So it's not really a cash society, right? They're subsisting. They're living, okay? But the state needs money. They can't pay their debtors back in eggs and milk. I mean, you can make a sweet omelet, especially if he took some of that milk, made a little cheese. No, but unfortunately, the nations like France won't take the eggs. They need the cold, hard currency, and there's just not any there. So what does the state do? They take your farm. You didn't pay the taxes, they take your farm. Okay, so you get booted off the land that you thought you paid for, and now what do you think? Now you fought in the American Revolution, so where are you? Where's your mindset? Protest. It's protest, right? Hey, we fought against taxes, didn't we? And now look at what our own state's doing to us. So Daniel Shays.
Okay. I was about to say, who is Shay?
Daniel Shays, he basically leads this ragtag group of farmers, and they start going after the judges who were seizing the land. Okay? Basically what the state would do, and they still do it today, if you don't pay your taxes, they seize your property, they auction it off to pay the taxes. That's what they do. Okay? So they started having these tax sales, and sometimes the farmers would scrape up a little money. They'd make sure nobody bid on somebody's farm, and they'd buy it back for just a little bit and give it back to them. Did that solve the problem? No, because next year, guess what's due? Taxes again. All right? So essentially, a group of these farmers, they got fed up, and Daniel Shays led this rebellion. This is actually in 1787 that this occurs. Now, this is important because this is what's going to prompt states to actually say, maybe there's something wrong. Because Massachusetts can't put this rebellion down. They're broke. They don't have a militia. They have to borrow a militia from Connecticut. Say, hey, can you help us? We got a problem. Okay? This government could not maintain order. And that's an important thing. Okay? So this cause, Shays' Rebellion, is super, super important because this caused people to question the Articles of Confederation. Now, this isn't the first group that questioned the Articles of Confederation. Probably the very first person was George Washington. What problem would George Washington have with the Articles of Confederation? There's no wood.
President?
No, he didn't want to be president. He wanted to be a farmer.
He was president.
There was no army.
Oh, yeah.
He knew we needed an army for defense of our nation. And he was very concerned about that. In fact, back in 1785, he had invited folks to come talk about it at his home. There was a conference called Mount Vernon Conference. James Madison came because he lived like 2 plantations over. And I think there 3 states were represented. And they said they were talking about their fears. They said, we didn't get many people here, so Mount Vernon's kind of out of the way, particularly at that point. They said, you know what? We need to have another meeting. So let's plan another meeting, 1786. Why don't we have a meeting in Annapolis? Because Annapolis, it's in the Chesapeake Bay. People should be able to get there.
Maryland?
Yeah, Annapolis, Maryland. That's where the Naval Academy is, right? So the next year they had the Annapolis Convention. And at the Annapolis Convention, 5 states were represented, including a guy from New York named Alexander Hamilton. Okay? And basically, at the Annapolis Convention, he said, you know what? I think we really can get more people here. He said, let's have one in Philadelphia. Because Philadelphia, that was sort of the center of our government at this point anyway. He said, let's just have it in Philadelphia the following year. Between the Annapolis Convention and between the Philadelphia Convention in 1787, Shays' Rebellion occurred. And Shays' Rebellion, this prompts 12 states to show up at the Philadelphia Convention in 1787. Okay? And
who was the one that didn't show up?
Rhode Island. Rhode Island was completely cool with the states having the power. But they've always been a little different from the beginning. Remember, Rhode Island it used to be called Rogues Island because somebody who was banished from Massachusetts founded that. They kicked Roger Williams out because he questioned. Well, he questioned multiple things in Massachusetts during Puritan rule. He said, okay, the Native Americans, the Indians, they were here. Shouldn't we pay them? Oh, that's crazy. Don't do that. And then he also questioned why the Puritan church was so powerful and why the government of the colony was supporting the Puritan church. And they're like, okay, you have got to go.
Get out.
In fact, they were going to send him back to England. They were going to banish him but he escaped to the south, negotiated. He purchased the land for Rhode Island. Why is it so small? And he formed his own colony, and the basis of that colony was religious freedom. Okay, so Rhode Island is always more independent than the other states. North Carolina would be the next most independent because those were the people who were kicked out of Virginia that couldn't afford land and stuff, so they went to the wilderness. And
Okay, so
yes.
Rhode Island, like, as far as like their stability, like they're pretty secure, you would say, right?
Today?
No,
Why, you got the bomb number or something?
Back, I mean, they were kind of Rhode Island at that point. Here's their mentality. They can't do anything to the Articles without us.
Okay.
But then the rest of the states fixed them and said, "We'll just make a new one."
Okay, realistically, here's what I was thinking.
Could they have stood by themselves? No.
Okay. So
Was
they
that
could-
your question?
Kind of. Like, I was thinking, like, it'd be like the perfect story of dude who just went to Rhode Island,
Mm-hmm.
like, noticed all the stuff going on in Massachusetts. He was like, oh, they weak. Let's go take that.
Oh, no. There was, after the American Revolution, particularly in New England, there was, we'd call it a recession, actually more like a depression. The money became pretty much worthless there. I mean, it was bad times. And Rhode Island was in the same boat. They just did not want to give up their independence and their power.
Okay.
So the wealthy do fear a potential threat of farmers violating property rights and taking the law into their own hands. Okay, so this helps lead to so many states showing up at what becomes the Constitutional Convention. So Shays' Rebellion is a very, very important event as far as American history and American government goes, because they may have just said, okay, well, we can go a little bit longer with the Articles of Confederation. Well, at this point, I know we're talking about the Articles, and we'll talk about the Constitutional Convention. We'll get particularly into that tomorrow. But right now, I want you to we're going to talk about what all governments should do. Okay? And I want us to list these out, and then I want you to think about the Articles of Confederation. And did it check the boxes? Okay? So all governments, and this is in Chapter 1, which, by the way, on Schoology for you, it's a video from, it's Jokes Productions. Basically, they go through the textbook and give you a video, and they hit the high points of the chapter you were supposed to read. Remember? So, just a little something to help you out. I know, Jody, you may have experienced it in A-Push. I don't know if y'all used Jokes back then, but he does same thing for A-Push. I don't know if he does world history or not. So, let's talk about what governments should do. Okay? And actually, in forming a government, there's two things we've got to determine. There's two questions we have to answer when we make a government. Is A, how should we govern? That's number one. And two, what should the government do? At what level is the government going to do things? Well, we're going to talk about sort of the common things that all governments should do. Okay? The first one, maintain a national defense. Maintain a national defense. Okay, well, I did ask you to ponder the Articles of Confederation as you're going through this. Maintain a national defense. Did the Articles provide for national defense? Not at all. They didn't. It did say we could raise an army, but we're not maintaining one, and we sure as heck can't pay them, can we? Okay? So maintain a national defense. Okay? Second thing is provide public goods and services. Provide public goods and services. Okay, well, let's talk about what a public good or service is. Basically, a public good is something that can be used by the public. Okay? So what might be a public good that we get from our government today?
Postal service.
Okay. Postal service, yes, it delivers the mail, doesn't it? Okay. A public good would be like a road too, right?
True.
We all were on a road or a sidewalk to get to school today, right? That is a public good.
I drove.
There's not a sign that says, I'm sorry, this is a private road. You can't use it. Now, granted, there are a few signs that says private driveway, please don't turn around, that kind of thing. Okay? But that is a public good. Okay? A public service is a service provided. For instance, y'all are enjoying a public service right now. Education. Yes. Okay. Now, did the Articles of Confederation provide for that? Public goods or services?
Well, I mean, they have roads, didn't they? Or just...
They did not. There was no national road system. Some of the, obviously cities and that kind of thing might have done it, but we're talking about the federal level of government. Okay? Right? Now, at that time, you could actually buy a piece of land, Mario. You could build a road across it and put gates at either end and say, oh, yes, I've got a nice road. That'll be $1. Okay, it's called a turnpike because the pikes, those were the gates. And if you paid, they would turn the pike and you'd go. I don't know if anybody's ever traveled to Florida or Oklahoma or somewhere. They've got turnpikes. You pay to drive on them. If you've been to Disney World and drove there, it's much easier just to pay that little money and get there instead of being on the interstate. All right. The next thing is preserve order.
Nope.
Preserve order. Now, national defense and preserving order is two different things. National defense is defending from foreign attack. Preserving order is keeping order in our streets, our cities, that kind of thing.
Nope.
How'd the Articles do on that?
Nope.
I don't know, Massachusetts. How did they do? They didn't. Okay? Massachusetts had to ask for Connecticut's help. Okay? Notice they didn't ask for Rhode Island's help. It's actually they asked for Connecticut and New York's help. New York helped them out too.
How did they ask for help? Like, did they send a letter?
They put a person on a horse and they rode like, hey, there's an insurrection. We need help. All right. You don't need a road for a horse. All right. Okay. Next, socialize the young.
I don't know. Socialize?
Socialize the young.
Are we supposed to be writing this?
Yeah, these are the things that governments are supposed to do.
Okay, hold on.
Socializing the young. Why do we have public education? It truly isn't necessarily for, trying to get you to college and that kind of thing. We literally are socializing you. That way you're not isolated. Gabe, you're not living out on a farm and only hanging out with your family all the time. Okay? But seriously, it is to bring people together and socialize. Now, and this, because basically in education you're supposed to learn how the system works, how our government works. Granted, I've got ideas about maybe some failings of public education sometimes, but basically you learn how to interact with people, right? Okay, like y'all on the football team, y'all learn how to interact with your teammates, with your coaches. Those of you in the band, the same thing, okay? Those of you, track people, you learn, what if you're in a relay race and you don't know how to pass the baton? Which is a major problem for some people when they're learning that. It's hard to pass a baton. All right, until you figure out the groove and are able to do it. All right, the last one and most hated by most. Collect taxes.
I feel like my dad don't do taxes the last 10 years.
Okay, but here's the thing. The thing about this is, how could the government do any of the other things without collecting taxes?
They can't, it's impossible.
They don't have any.
They can't. Now, I want you to understand, when we talk about the Articles of Confederation, we are talking about the national government at that time. You did have taxes at the state level and the local level, okay? The states, remember, were working really as an independent entity that just happened to sort of, yeah, we're in a group with these other states. But those things were being provided by the states and local government. The whole court system was state and local at this time, okay? So I want you to understand that there was a modicum of it. However, the federal government, which didn't even exist because it wasn't a federal system at that time. Come on in. So it didn't. So I want you to understand the Articles of Confederation seriously weak, and we see they're fraught with problems. Okay, and those become evident as things like Shays' Rebellion come to light, and so now the founding fathers, they have to figure out where that pendulum needs to hit, because we know we got to strengthen that government, don't we? Well, do we want to go all the way and say, let's make a king? Did you know they wanted to draft George Washington right after the Revolutionary War? They wanted to make him king. Did you know that? And he's like, I'm going to my farm. Like, I didn't fight for that. George Washington, if you ever get a chance, go to Mount Vernon and learn about him. He only wanted to be a farmer, and they kept calling him back. I don't know if it's still there because it's been a while since I've been to the Smithsonian, but literally there is a statue that it was in hiding because actually I think George Washington wanted it to be destroyed, but it's a statue of him wearing the laurel leaves and everything that looks like one of the Caesars from Rome. He's sitting there in a toga and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he's like, not me.
He sounds too humble.
Not me.
He's killed 2 people.
He wanted to be back at the farm. And so
It's always the farm people. They got someone that
the farm people have something up their sleeve. That's great. Okay. All right. Now,
There's the bad thing. Yeah, he was a slave owner. Yeah. There we go. Good job, Will.
while, yes, slavery was not, and I don't agree with slavery at all. But here's the thing. Listen. Here's the thing. We have to be careful when we're studying history.
Oh yeah, because that was normalized.
Because that was the economic system they were living in right then. And so I caution you there. Yes, he was a slave owner, but that doesn't discount completely everything he did.
It's like a lot of. Well, are you still recording?
Yes.
We'll talk later.
Okay. All right. Okay, yeah, anyway.
Hold on, wait. What page are those questions on? Since I don't know how to write. The government question.
10.
Nice.
Page 10 of the textbook.
Nice.
All right, so moving on from Shays' Rebellion. Now, every state did have a constitution that did go further than the Articles of Confederation. Okay? Oops.
Did anybody get the effect?
Huh? A more I lost the word. More effective government was needed. That was the effect of Shays' Rebellion. Okay? All right, we're getting close to the bell. We're within 4 or 5 minutes of it. So we'll go ahead and stop for right now as far as this goes. Tomorrow we'll delve into the Constitutional Convention. Any questions about what we covered today?